Times, here to discuss this, as well as politics here at home. Another J.D. Gordon, former Defense Department spokesman, as we have this J.D. to J.D. discussion, and we thank you for Skyping in there, Brother Gordon. Your take on this entire situation. Is Speaker Boehner right about the situation in Afghanistan?
Well, first, JD, thanks very much for having me on the show. I like this JD to JD segment. Once in 2012, one of my virtual friends on Facebook sent me an encouraging note about taking on Senator McCain in the primary. So it's good to join you on the show today. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad you got the accolades. I got some of the other stuff that went with that back earlier a few years ago. But to the here and now, and sadly not a lot of smiling about the situation in Afghanistan, sad to say. Right. Is Boehner right? And what about President Obama not even mentioning the sacrifice of this major general yet in any public announcement?
Yeah, that's right, JD. I think Speaker Boehner is right. I think you just can't wish away the Taliban. You can't just pretend Al-Qaeda is not a threat and they're not there. I think that President Obama's strategy is deeply flawed. You shouldn't send a press release to the enemy during wartime to announce a timetable for withdrawal. It should be based on the facts on the ground, how it's going, how the war's going. And frankly, right now, it's not going very well at all. We just lost a major general. Unfortunately, President Obama hasn't even acknowledged that yet publicly. So I think that it's a flawed strategy. We need to look at a long-term solution for Afghanistan. And that may mean, JD, keeping U.S. troops there for years to come. I'm not talking about a lot of troops, but about 5,000 to 10,000. Because what we don't want to have happen is a pre-9/11 scenario where the Taliban takes over the government again. We've got Al-Qaeda again in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Those are the same set of circumstances we had before 9/11. We don't want to go having lost all that blood and treasure. We've had over 2,000 U.S. troops killed in Afghanistan. We don't want them to have lost their lives for nothing.
Well, J.D., I want to play for you something that George Will had to say regarding Mr. Obama's foreign policy, and we'll get your reaction after we listen to this. Here it is.
For the foreseeable future, so far as I can tell, in foreign policy, America is, under this president, a spectator on someone else's game, from the Ukraine to Syria to Gaza to Iraq. The United States is looking on and commenting.
And there's George Will saying that our country is standing back, and I would put it this way, the commander-in-chief has become the observer-in-chief. Is Mr. Will right about foreign policy, or what's your take on the Obama presidency and Mr. Obama as our commander-in-chief?
JD, I would agree with Mr. Will. I think that the president's been somewhat of a spectator on world events, and you can see the power vacuum that's happening before our eyes. That's just encouraged dictators and aggressive countries like in Russia, like in Iran, to do even more harmful things to the international community. We saw Russia take over parts of Ukraine. They took over the Crimean Peninsula. They're looking to take over the eastern part of Ukraine right now in Donetsk and Luhansk. And so I think that vacuum in U.S. leadership is readily apparent around the world. And that's caused by, I think, President Obama's ideology. He has this rosa view color of the world. I think he thinks that if we didn't have any nuclear weapons in the world, we'd be a safer place. That couldn't be further from the truth. Basically, our enemies would then take advantage of that, and they are taking advantage of that right now.
And speaking of right now, I guess there are talks going on again in Europe about nukes and the Iranians. John Kerry, meantime, makes a side trip to Afghanistan, we're getting reports, so at least the Secretary of State is there on the ground seeing firsthand what is going on. Perhaps that augurs at least the notion that our Secretary of State is where the action is taking place and where our attention needs to be concentrated.
I do, but I think that overall the president's strategy has been one of appeasement. He thinks you can appease our enemies and just wish the war on terror away, if you will. And he doesn't focus our priorities on protecting U.S. strength. And our enemies basically take advantage of that weakness. I think we ought to do things like expand NATO exercises in Eastern Europe. We ought to admit Georgia into NATO, for instance. That would dissuade Russia from taking any more of their territory, for instance. They already have 20% of Georgia they occupied back in 2008. I think that President Obama's desire to just take a step back from the world is harmful to us. I had lunch with a former European ambassador here a few months ago, And he said something that I thought was really interesting. He said President Obama tried so hard to be the unbush. But to be the unbush, you set yourself up for an ambush. And I thought that was exactly what he's doing. I've spoken to the European Parliament a couple times. Yep. Exactly.
Well,
and they're very disappointed with his lack of leadership.
That European would do pretty well on the campaign stump in the United States. The ambush can turn into an ambush. We're going to talk domestic politics in just a second. One other foreign policy note, JD, and it has to do with the U.S.-Africa summit that just closed out yesterday, took place this week, where you are there in Washington, D.C. Most of the focus of the summit, boosting U.S. business ties with Africa. Let's take a listen to something President Obama said, and again, I'll be interested in your reaction.
The United States is determined to be a partner in Africa's success, a good partner, an equal partner, and a partner for the long term. So we've got a lot of work to do. We have to do better, much better. I want Africans buying more American products. I want Americans buying more African products.
So there's the president talking about business. Meantime, talking about $30 billion in commitments to Africa as some of our majors in the service are getting pink-slipped while they're on duty in Afghanistan in a drawdown to deal with budget constraints. Is this the message our president should be sending internationally?
No, I don't think so, but I think he's trying to preserve his legacy with this summit for Africa. He's paid very little attention to Africa. You know, when he was elected, there were tremendous expectations for him there, and I think he's best known for Africa for his Cairo speech, which basically he talked about a new beginning for relations with Muslim-majority countries, and what did that lead to? A lot of people said it helped lead to the Arab Spring. So he's known for that, and he's also known for that selfie in South Africa where he took that picture with the Danish Prime Minister and the British Prime Minister, David Cameron. So I think that he hasn't paid enough attention to Africa, and I think he's trying to cement his legacy for doing more right now. So I understand he's trying to help business relations with the U.S. and Africa. I think that's the right move, but I think his priorities have been messed up since day one, frankly.
JD, let's turn our priorities to American politics, Republican politics, a rare Thursday primary. This one run down in Tennessee. Tennessee Republicans have a decision to make. Do they want to keep Lamar Alexander in the United States Senate, or does the state legislator and Tea Party favorite Joe Carr get the nomination? What's your take on what's transpiring from Nashville to Chattanooga to Knoxville and beyond?
Well, you know, I was Herman Cain's chief spokesman, and we took several trips to Tennessee, and that was one of our favorite states because people get so involved in the politics out there. They're very passionate about it, and I think they're going to make the right decision, whatever that decision is for them. I don't want to say what it is or who it should be, but I think they've got a decision that a lot of people around the country are making, basically in these Republican primaries. The establishment, the conservative establishment candidates, and some of the Tea Party candidates, some of the folks who want to shake up Washington a little bit more. So I think it's up to Tennessee to decide. We're going to see how it turns out, and I hope that the best candidate wins.
JD, quite the diplomat. Despite your past experience at the Pentagon, you may end up in the State Department at some future administration, or perhaps you didn't reveal the contents of that note you got on Facebook when they confused you as the JD who challenged John McCain back in 2010. At any rate, JD, we thank you for your time. JD Gordon Skyping in there from Washington, D.C. We'll have you back again real soon for another JD to JD talk, okay?
Love the idea. Thanks so much, JD. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it too, JD. Now, to your P's and Q's and the bottom line. What do you think is going to transpire abroad? What do you expect in domestic politics in the volunteer state tonight? Why don't you tweet us your comments at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum. You can also get to us, newsmaxtv.com/comment. And don't forget Facebook. America's Forum continues following this timeout.